Friends, in this episode, I plan to talk about multilateral diplomacy. Now, I spent much of my time in bilateral work, but while I was in Geneva from 1967 to 70, I was mainly involved with representing India at various international agencies located in Geneva. I've written about it in my memoir, and I will post a link to that. And then when I was in Nairobi from 1984 to 86, 2.5 years, I was deeply involved in the affairs of the UN Environment Programme, which was gathering momentum as a major focal point in international affairs. I chaired an important committee at this UNEP, and I was also the chair of the G77 group. Now, those experiences were absolutely invaluable. So, let me turn to multilateral diplomacy and make the usual 3 big points. First, multilateral diplomacy is when groups of countries meet together in a regional organization, in a special entity like BRICS, for example, that brings together 5 countries, Brazil, South Africa, China, Russia, and India, or G20, which brings together the world's 20 leading economic powers, the UN agencies, as I mentioned, and of course the main UN organization headquartered in New York with offices in Geneva, Vienna, and other places. The United Nations is a global negotiating machine. It's shall we say, the acme of multilateral diplomatic work. And if I consult my notebook again, it's the place where diplomats stationed in what are called permanent missions, they mainly work with one another. That is, they represent their countries at the annual UN General Assembly meeting, at special sessions of the General Assembly, at UN Security Council meetings, at the committee meetings, and at many international meetings that take place continually in Geneva, in New York, I mean, and also in Geneva, but maybe a little less so. So this is a negotiation machine. Your outreach, your connections are to one another. People in the other diplomatic missions, the non-governmental organizations that are affiliated to the UN, which have consultative status, the journalists who keep track of UN affairs, the many international agencies that have now become providers of information to the UN system. I'll give you an example. Médecins Sans Frontières and many other global humanitarian organizations often have information from the ground about what's happening in Sudan or Yemen, the hot spots, the places where it's difficult to gather data. They know more than almost any other government because they've got people literally at the front line of crisis situations. And governments today listen to them. So, a diplomat working at these places, New York in particular, but also in Geneva, also in Vienna or Rome or Paris, which also have UN agencies, they all need strong interconnections with one another. They don't engage in bilateral work. They don't engage in economic diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, except to a limited extent within that particular international organization to which they are accredited or where they work. So it is a special kind of work focus. First, above all, negotiations. That's the first point. My second point is about how you work within a mission like this. What is the nature of your activities? First, whichever organization you work with, you have to know its rules of procedure. You have to know what that agency is doing. You have to understand its mechanics, its constitution, and its ways of work, its habits of work, we may say, or the work ethos, if you want to call it that. Your aim is to become an insider. You must know that entity intimately. You must know the rules. You must know the procedures. You must have an ability that if you walk into a meeting, a committee, for example, the UN has 6 committees in New York, and they are known by their numbers, the 5th committee or the 3rd committee. And some deal with economic affairs, some deal with decolonization issues, etc., etc. You should be able to understand the internal dynamics of that committee. Now let's say you've entered into that kind of an entity for the first time. How do you find out? You sit and you observe. Just by looking around, just by absorbing information, you will get to understand who are the shakers and movers in that particular committee or group. In the old days, if you saw somebody walk across and whisper to somebody, you would say, hey, those 2 guys have a connection, they are friends, they exchange information. But today, we live in the digital age. A guy will pull out his phone and send off a WhatsApp message or a WeChat message or whatever, and you have no idea who it's gone to. But if you look closely, you will still catch those little signals that people give to each other. And that's how you get to know who are the 5, 8, 12 people who kind of run the show at this place. Your larger objective is to become one of them, to become a member of that small group that runs things. Now, you can't do it so easily. There is no application process where you go and tell somebody, hey, I'm an awfully nice guy and I want to join you. No, you have to make yourself useful. You have to make yourself knowledgeable. You have to present yourself as a person who is worth knowing. So it is a gentle art of presenting yourself in the best way you can. For example, there are opportunities for appointments. Appointment in a committee, in a drafting group, in a rapporteur group, becoming a vice chair or even a chair of a particular cluster, a committee, a subgroup, whatever it may be, or becoming a member of what are sometimes called friends of the chair group. Each entity, each one works to its own particular kind of rhythm, and you have to understand that. People have to respect you for your professional knowledge, for the contacts that you bring and the material, the information you bring to the table. And that again means you have to know your subject intimately. You have to be able to offer something that is attractive to other people. You need to be charming. You need to be persuasive. You need to appear as a person who will work for a larger purpose. Everybody in a committee represents a government. I'm talking of diplomats. So everyone expects them to work to advance their own country's interests. But you can do it in an enlightened way by being flexible, by saying, hey, I'm out there for myself, for my country, but I'm also willing to work with you for a larger purpose. If you're drafting a resolution, maybe I can help you to improve your text, or maybe I will persuade my government to become a co-sponsor of the resolution. So you need to kind of get involved with what goes on. You need to know how to chair a committee. That's a very special skill. Again, it comes from observation, it comes from study, it comes from work. So as Kishore Mehbubani has a very nice essay on how to win the World Cup in multilateral diplomacy. It's a nice term, winning a World Cup. And he says, you must be flexible, but you must also stick to principles. That looks like a contradiction, but it's as if you have to be able to ride two horses at the same time. And you have to be charming. You have to invest in people. And that really brings me to the third and larger point of how multilateral diplomacy usually functions. In a regional group, there are the regional group's dynamics. In ASEAN, for example, a lot of business is conducted on the golf course. ASEAN is well known for its strong attachment to the game of golf. If you are not a golfer, then I'm afraid you are not going to get terribly far in an ASEAN-related group. Elsewhere, it may be groups of people that play bridge together or have other common interests. You have to find a hook, a way that helps you to connect. Many countries have relatively small diplomatic missions, particularly the smaller countries, the developing countries. Being a member of a very large diplomatic mission can actually be a pain, not a big advantage. I'll give you an example. When the permanent mission of the UK, which is now in the process of leaving the European Union, but let's say when it was a full member, the permanent missions officials, when they met in an auditorium. There were almost 100 of them. So the permanent representative would come to the meeting, speak for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then leave it to his deputy to conduct the rest of that meeting. Now, if you are in a small mission, you will be a team of 8, 10, 12 people. You have to have extremely open, friendly, smooth relationships with one another. There is no room for clash of egos, no room for asserting your own brilliance. If you're brilliant, that brilliance will carry you through. It will become self-evident. You don't have to market yourself in a crude way. I hope you get the point I'm making, which is that be persuasive, be charming, but also be modest. You remember, Nicholson also talks about the importance of modesty. The other thing is you have to invest in people. There's a very fine Australian diplomat. She had been the permanent representative of her country in New York, and she told me that whenever she received invitations to national days, mind you, at the UN there are 192 country members, so every second or third day there is a national day reception. Some of them are held in big missions, fancy hotels, some are in smaller places. She would travel to wherever a national day event was held, because she said, if I go there as a Western ambassador to a small Asian country or a small Latin American country or an African country, they will say, look, this ambassador has taken the trouble to come all the way to our reception and spend a good half hour there meeting with people. That's where real friendships are made, by making those sacrifices. And she told me there were days when she attended 3 and 4 functions in a row, traveling from one to the other in her nice luxurious car, but it's a pain to invest 2.5 hours of your evening attending 3 or 4 receptions, but she treated it as essential contact building. There are many other examples that can be found. A different professional skill, language. Now you may say, who bothers about languages in New York? Everybody speaks English. Sure. But if you speak Swahili, or if you speak Bhasa, which means the languages that are spoken in both Malaysia and in Indonesia, and a little bit in the other countries as well, or if you speak Portuguese, you will have connections to a cluster of countries who are far more comfortable when somebody speaks to them in their own language. And that again is a way of building connections. So more than anything else, and this is my third and final point and the last point I really want to make, multilateral diplomacy is all about professionalism. It's about working to a purpose. But remember, whatever form of diplomacy that is pursued, multilateral, regional, bilateral, they are all variants of one essential compendium, which is diplomacy. And multilateral diplomacy and regional diplomacy, vital as they are, for both these, the building block is the bilateral relationship. If the relations between my country and country X or Y are solid, then that is also automatically transported into the multilateral or the regional diplomacy process. And remember, in my very first talk, I said that bilateral and multilateral diplomacy are really the 2 legs of the diplomatic process. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy these conversations. If you like them, subscribe to them and tell your friends about it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.